Joining me now is Einar Tangen. He's a political and economic affairs commentator. Let's talk a little bit about Qing's meetings there in India. I know one of the messages he's likely to convey, we just heard it, these ongoing positive signals about multilateralism. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and also one of the other things she addressed in the story, which is this border conflict issue. Do you think there might be some movement there as well?
Well, it's difficult to see that there'll be a complete resolution. I think if there's any major progress on the border issue, it'll probably happen next fall when there's due to be a direct face-to-face meeting between Xi and Modi. In terms of multilateralism, I think it's fairly clear if you start looking at how many of these nations are viewing, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The global South, Central Asia, they want to move on. They want to talk about the economic problems that the world has right now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of finger pointing going on, both by Russia and by the U.S. and Europe, about who's at fault. Unfortunately, that does not solve anything. So at this point, China is trying to calm the waters. Instead of throwing gasoline in the form of missiles and things like that, it's proposing that people actually sit down and talk, which is the only way that this is going to be resolved. But you're starting to see a sharpening in positions, differences between the global South and the developed North.
And you make a really good point, because when you think about the G7, that's a lot of Western allies kind of lockstep with the United States. So you look at the G20, it's a different makeup altogether. The BRICS nations are going to be there, obviously. We know Lavrov's going to be there, Blinken's going to be there. Do you see many of these countries kind of looking at China's, paper, the 12-point plan, and looking at kind of, as you said, looking for off-ramps with this conflict in Ukraine?
Well, absolutely. Everybody's looking for an off-ramp, except perhaps the United States at this juncture. It's clear that the U.S. is not satisfied with anything that's being put forward. They've already said that they don't like the plan. But everybody else is saying, look, China's put forward 12 points, which are in essence setting the table so that people can sit around it. What should be on the table in terms of sovereignty, security, etc.? What should be off the table? Nuclear options. So that is the beginning, and there's been a lot of diplomacy by Qing to reach out directly to these different nations. They're initially going more towards Belarus and Russia to make sure that they're comfortable with what's going on, and then I'm absolutely certain that there will be more outreach, not only to Europe and America, but here in India itself at the G20. I think this will be coming up with Rav Shankar. Obviously, South Africa has already said that they refuse to be bullied. That was back in August, when Blinken visited. So I do think that there's much more support in the global South and Central Asia to get this thing done. And hopefully that will result in enough pressure to bring these parties to the table and settle this, regardless of whether the U.S. wants to do it or not.
Yeah, what about China's standing on the world stage now as they move forward, putting forth this plan?
Well, once again, it's a big divide. If you go into the global South and Central Asia, China has a very, very positive reception. There are always questions. China's rapid rise is always something where people are trying to figure out if China is going to be like the U.S., a new hegemon that's going to impose its values, or whether it will stick to its current narrative, which is, look, we want to trade, we're not trying to impose. But these, in terms of the rest of the world, and especially the international press, China is vilified on a daily basis. You're seeing these, kind of old, worn accusations about the origins of COVID, spying, all kinds of things being thrown into the machinery. Definitely part of the disinformation campaign. But, the U.S. feels very strongly that China is an existential threat to its dominance, and therefore is going to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at China.
Einar, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your insights.